Welcome to today's edition of Fight News Now Extra. I'm John Pollock. Plenty of news to get to with John Ramdine and Robin Black. A number of title fights have been announced for May, a big fight at 155 pounds, and we'll hear from Ronda Rousey about the UFC's commitment to out-of-competition drug testing. A pair of title fights were confirmed on UFC tonight. Jon Jones and Anthony Johnson are going to meet for the light heavyweight title on May the 23rd in Las Vegas over Memorial Day weekend, along with Chris Weidman defending the middleweight title on that same card against Vitor Belfort for UFC 187. If the title fights don't fall apart, this will definitely be one of their biggest cards of 2015. The UFC 187 card on May 23rd is not simply resting on the two title fights announced, as more fights are being added, including a major fight at 155 pounds between Donald Cerrone and Khabib Nurmagomedov made official. Heavyweights and former teammates Travis Browne and Andrei Arlovski will meet on the card, as well as flyweights John Moraga and Joseph Benavidez. And on Wednesday, the UFC announced their plans for a more stringent drug testing plan to be implemented later this year and to include out-of-competition testing throughout the year for those on the roster, as well as all championship and main event fighters to be tested throughout their camps. UFC Women's Bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey has been outspoken on PEDs in the sport and shared her thoughts with MMAfighting.com on the UFC's announcement.
I'm actually extremely encouraged by all the new steps that they're taking. It's becoming much closer to the drug testing and policies that I got used to growing up with USADA. And one thing that I thought was really lacking before was random out-of-competition drug testing for everybody all the time, which is what I've had to deal with since I was 16 years old. You know, I started getting in-competition drug testing at 14 and then was doing in and out of competition drug testing by the time I was 16. And I thought it was a real shame that at 16 years old, I was getting tested more strictly and stringently than I was, you know, as a world champion fighter. And now it really seems like the USADA and UFC policies are becoming much more comparable, and I'm really happy to see that. I really would like to see increased punishments for people who are repeat offenders. You know, that if every time you do it, it's only 2 years. Like, no, like maybe it should double every single time. So you do it the first time it's 2, you do the second time it's 4, do the next time it's 8 or something like that. But you know, that's just my opinion. I believe that with a combat sport like the UFC, it's so important, so much more important than any other sport, because it's not just fairness, it's the safety of the fighters. And keeping the sport safe is what makes it possible for us to do it.
Here with John Ramdine and Robin Black. We'll start off with you, Mr. Black, because John and I discussed this heavily on Wednesday, but the UFC's announcement and how they are planning to implement all of these changes regarding drug testing. What was your takeaway from the press conference?
I think I'm actually part of, there is a certain, you know, like fans are broken up into different chunks, and I think I belong to the one chunk where it's like, I don't really care about all this, just fix it. Like, we don't like it, it's clearly bad, the sport is looking bad, just fix it, but don't tell us all about it, just make it better.
But is it possible? Because I think a lot of people are skeptical that there's no way that when you're talking about global mixed martial arts and everybody being on the same page, will the UFC, with the help of the commissions around the world, be able to remove performance-enhancing drugs from mixed martial arts?
Just make it better. Just like make it better. I want to talk about title fights and great fighters and stuff. I don't want to pretend that there's not bad things going on. Just please make it better.
We shall see. Time is going to be the ultimate factor here, and how they can implement a lot of these changes that we've discussed. There's still a lot of hurdles to clear. But in the wake of all of that, they have announced some big fights coming up for later this year. We can start with the May 23rd show over Memorial Day weekend, announcing 2 title fights. So in case one falls out, we've got our backup.
Why would one fall out?
I've no idea. Lots of things
Are you
happen.
accusing Vitor Belfort of something?
Life happens. That's all I'm saying. You could get injured. We have Chris Weidman, Vitor Belfort on the same card as Jon Jones and Anthony Johnson.
Holy smokes.
I think that this is really going to be the template we see for a lot of pay-per-views for that very reason, that as we are doing more testing, we can't be caught with a situation like we could have had with Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz, where one fight falls apart and the whole house of cards goes with it. So I think that where possible, you're going to see a lot of pay-per-views structured in this manner.
Yeah, you're going to have to, because there's a number of reasons. You look at the Fox cards, they're absolutely loaded. So people are tuning into network television, getting an outstanding product for free, and then you go to pay-per-view and the cards aren't as loaded as they once were. So it's the responsibility of the UFC to kind of cover their asses and put as many big fights as humanly possible on those cards. In case something happens, they still have the supporting cast.
Yeah, I mean, Chris blew out one of his ribs when he was supposed to fight Vitor, and we have Ronda Rousey still main eventing a card. Because we had 2 title fights, you've still got a good card. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we're also seeing Fox and pay-per-views being like, these are big shows. And some of the, fight nights, the Fight Pass ones are like, hey man, if you're a big fan, watch these young guys. And I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I think that we're really seeing now that diversification. Fox is typically designed for your contender fights. Luke Rockhold, Lyoto Machida, that's going to lead to a main event potentially for the winner. And that's kind of what Fox is being used to, that last step before you get a title fight, and then you get the title fight on pay-per-view. And I don't think that's a bad method to be going through with. Also announced, we got Rory McDonald and Robbie Lawler for July the 11th alongside Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor. So very much stacking the deck here. Rory McDonald, I think, does anyone have an issue with him getting this title fight? I mean, now it's the opposite, where I'm sure Johnny Hendricks is probably not crazy about the fact that he had been told he was getting this rematch. Now he's got Matt Brown, and should he win against Matt Brown, might have to fight another time. But that's just the way this goes in a loaded division.
Yeah, right now at 170 pounds, you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe 7 guys there. They are all so competitive that every one of those guys will be challenging for the UFC title over the next number of years. Or hold the title, because it's so competitive. I would not be surprised to see Rory McDonald become the new UFC champion. Carlos Condit comes back. He somehow manages to beat Rory McDonald. He becomes the champion. Robbie Lawler comes back. He beats Carlos Condit, and it goes back and forth. Right now, 170 pounds. Arguably the most exciting division and the most competitive.
You also have to look at this being the big international fight week card. They know that Conor McGregor is going to bring X amount of people all the way from Ireland. I think the hope is that Rory McDonald can bring some Canadians to Las Vegas as well and try and, much like what George would do for his big fights, where there was a huge contingent of Canadians. And in that case, Rory maybe looks more valuable than a Johnny Hendricks for this kind of event.
There's going to be a lot of drunk Irish and Canadians hanging out, because we get along with those people over there. They're kind of from the same background as us. That is definitely a trip to take to Vegas, no doubt about it. But that I've not always been all that interested in how rankings work and who's up next. This is actually very interesting to me. When there's a dominant champion, it's like, who's next, who's next, who's next, keep beating them. But when they're close, it's like, no matter who Lawler was going to face, it was going to be a rematch because they're all really, really close. This sort of smashing into each other traffic to find out who really is the best is actually super interesting to me. Yeah.
All right, and we look ahead. This Sunday night, the UFC returns to Brazil. We will be live with a preview show Sunday leading into the prelim fights here on Fight Network. We hope you catch all of them, and we have more Fight News Now Extra coming your way.